Hello from Mindset Daily, wishing you a day full of health, peace, and happiness. Thank you for watching the Mindset Daily channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support us. Thank you so much. Have you ever felt torn between being kind and being taken for granted? Is kindness always the right answer, even when it costs you your peace? What if true kindness requires wisdom just as much as compassion? God calls us to be kind, but not to be fools. The Bible is clear. Kindness isn't a suggestion. It's a commandment. We are called to live with love, to extend mercy, to walk in patience, and to reflect the character of Christ in every part of our daily lives. But far too often, people confuse kindness with weakness. They assume that being a Christian means tolerating mistreatment, staying silent in the face of manipulation, or being used by others for their own selfish gain. That was never God's intention. Look at Jesus. He was the ultimate example of kindness. He healed the sick, fed the hungry, and showed deep compassion to the crowds that followed him. But Jesus was never naive. He wasn't afraid to speak truth. He rebuked deceitful hearts, turned over the tables of those who turned the temple into a marketplace, and boldly confronted the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. His kindness was powerful, but it was guided by wisdom. Today, there are still those who will try to take advantage of your kindness. They'll see your forgiving heart and think they can mistreat you again and again without consequence. But let's be clear, God never called you to be a doormat. He never asked you to accept abuse or allow your dignity to be trampled. Proverbs 4 verse 7 reminds us, wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. That means God expects us to think, to discern, to be intentional. He wants us to use the wisdom He has already given us, to be mindful of who we allow into our lives and how we share our kindness. Because kindness, real kindness, does not mean tolerating sin. It does not mean keeping destructive people close just to keep the peace. So how do we walk in both kindness and wisdom? Let's explore that deeper in the next part. Picking up from where we left off, we've seen that kindness must be anchored in wisdom. But what does that wisdom look like in real life? Being kind doesn't mean you have to let everyone into your inner circle. It doesn't mean saying yes to every request or constantly bending over backward for people who show no respect for your personal boundaries. Jesus made that clear when He told His disciples in Matthew 10 verse 16, "Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves." In other words, we are called to be gentle and loving, but also to walk in discernment, to be aware, and to proceed with caution when necessary. Some of you have been pouring yourselves out, giving kindness without measure to people who only take. You've extended grace over and over, thinking that's what it means to be a good Christian. But let me be honest with you. Jesus never let Himself be manipulated. He walked away from those who wanted to harm Him before His appointed time. He didn't entrust Himself to people whose intentions were wicked. He didn't waste His energy on crowds who only followed Him for miracles but had no real desire to know Him. Yes, He was kind, but He was never foolish. God wants you to carry that same kind of wisdom. Sometimes kindness means walking away. Sometimes it means saying no. Sometimes it means setting firm boundaries and refusing to be mistreated. Forgiveness, yes, is a commandment, but trust? That must be earned. Just because you forgive someone doesn't mean they automatically deserve a place in your life again. Proverbs 22 verse 3 tells us, "A prudent man foreseeth the evil, and hideth himself, but the simple pass on, and are punished." A wise person sees danger ahead and takes action. A fool, on the other hand, ignores the signs and suffers for it. So what does it actually look like to live out this balance between compassion and caution, between grace and good judgment? Let's turn to that in the next section. Building on what we just explored, setting boundaries and using discernment is not unkind. It's wisdom in action. Now, let's look even deeper at how this truth played out in the life of Jesus himself. If someone continuously lies to you, disrespects your boundaries, or wounds you again and again, it is not unkind to step back. In fact, it's wise. Protecting your peace isn't something to feel guilty about. It's something to honor. Many believers struggle with this idea, feeling as if being a Christian means allowing others to walk all over them. But that's not what Jesus did, and it's certainly not what he expects from you. God wants you to live with kindness, yes, but not at the cost of wisdom. Even Jesus, the Son of God, the Messiah, the Savior of the world, was rejected and betrayed. Think about that. He came to bring salvation, to heal the sick, to restore sight to the blind, to share the good news of the kingdom. And yet, he was despised by many. If even the perfect and sinless Son of God faced rejection, why would we be surprised when we face it too? From the very beginning of his ministry, Jesus encountered strong resistance. The religious leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, didn't welcome him with open arms. They didn't rejoice when he cast out demons or when he raised the dead. No, they were offended. They accused him of being demon-possessed, of breaking the law, even of blaspheming God. Why? Because he didn't come in the way they expected. He wasn't chasing power or wealth. He didn't conform to their traditions or seek their approval. Instead, he exposed their hypocrisy, and for that, they rejected him. Even in his own hometown of Nazareth, Jesus wasn't fully accepted. So what does that mean for us, especially when rejection comes from people closest to us? That's what we'll look into next. We've just seen how even in his own hometown, Jesus was rejected by those who should have known him best. But that was only the beginning. The pain of rejection would reach even deeper. The people who had watched Jesus grow up, the ones who knew his family, who saw him day after day, could not believe that he was truly the Son of God. When he stood in the synagogue and preached with authority, they were offended. "Isn't this the carpenter's son?" they asked. "Isn't his mother's name Mary?" They couldn't see beyond what was familiar. Their hearts were closed, and their minds refused to believe. The Bible tells us that because of their unbelief, Jesus could not do many miracles there. Imagine that. Their doubt shut the door on the divine. But perhaps the most heartbreaking rejection came not from the crowds or the skeptics, but from someone within his inner circle. Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples handpicked by Jesus, who had walked beside him for 3 years, saw the miracles, heard every teaching, experienced the love and compassion of Christ firsthand, betrayed him for 30 pieces of silver. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Judas led the soldiers straight to Jesus and greeted him with a kiss. The ultimate act of betrayal, cloaked in the image of affection. And yet, Jesus knew it would happen. He knew Judas would betray him. He knew Peter would deny him. He knew that when he was arrested, his closest friends would scatter. Still, he chose to love them. He broke bread with them. He washed their feet. That is the depth of his love, a love that remains even in the face of abandonment. But it doesn't erase the pain. When Jesus stood before Pilate, the same crowd that had once cried out, "Hosanna," now shouted, "Crucify him." The same people who had followed him, who had seen his miracles, who had been fed by his hands, turned their backs on him. They chose a criminal, Barabbas, over the sinless Son of God. They mocked him. They spat on him. They pressed a crown of thorns into his head and nailed him to a cross. The rejection was complete. But what did Jesus do in response to that ultimate rejection? Let's uncover that next. After witnessing the ultimate rejection, mocked, betrayed, and crucified, we come to understand something powerful. Jesus knows rejection in a way no one else ever could. He experienced the deep pain of being misunderstood, of being falsely accused, and of being completely abandoned by those closest to him. He knows what it's like to pour out love only to have it thrown back in his face. He knows the sting of betrayal by a trusted friend. He knows what it feels like to stand completely alone. So if even Jesus was rejected, how can we expect to be accepted by everyone? If he was betrayed, should we really be shocked when those we care about turn their backs on us? The world rejected him, and it will reject those who truly follow him. But here's the key. Jesus never let rejection stop him from fulfilling his purpose. He never allowed betrayal to harden his heart. He never let hatred change who he was. Instead, he stayed faithful to his mission, to his calling, and to his Father in heaven. That's the model we're meant to follow. And that's why God tells us to guard our hearts. Proverbs 4 verse 23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Your heart is not something to take lightly. It's the source of your emotions, your desires, your decisions. It's the wellspring of your life. And because of that, it must be protected with wisdom and intention. Not everyone in your life is there for the right reasons. Not every smile hides good intentions. Not every person who draws close was sent by God. Some will try to deceive, some will manipulate, and some may betray. That's why God doesn't just call us to love. He also calls us to discern. Even Jesus understood this clearly. In John 2, verses 24 to 25, it says, "But Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He did not need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in each person." So how do we apply this same discernment in our own lives? How do we love without being blind and protect our hearts without becoming hard? That's what we'll dive into next. Picking up from our last point, we saw how Jesus, though full of love, was never naive. He understood what was in the hearts of people and chose to love with discernment. That principle is crucial for us today. Jesus loved everyone, but he didn't place his trust in just anyone. He was kind, but he was also discerning. He knew that not everyone who followed him truly believed in him. Some were drawn by the miracles. Others hoped he would rise to political power. And some were simply waiting for the right moment to betray him. So what did Jesus do? He guarded his heart. He never allowed himself to be deceived. He extended love, but always with wisdom. The same is true for us. Right now, there may be people in your life who don't genuinely have your best interests at heart. Some may pretend to support you on the outside, but are secretly working against you. Some are jealous of the blessings God has placed over your life. Others want to keep you trapped in cycles of sin, emotional dependence, or toxic relationships. And some simply want to use you for what you can offer them: your time, your energy, your resources. If you're not watchful, these people can drain you spiritually, emotionally, even physically. That's why God continually urges us to be vigilant. He calls us to use wisdom, to be intentional about who we allow close. Because the enemy rarely comes dressed as a threat. He uses people who seem kind, trustworthy, even loving. They may say the right things, offer false comfort, and promise loyalty. Yet behind it all, there's a deeper intent. Sometimes, these people won't be strangers. They may come in the form of friends, co-workers, even family. But what does the Bible say? In Matthew 7 verse 16, it reminds us, "You will know them by their fruits." Words can mislead, but actions always reveal the truth. So if someone in your life constantly brings confusion, chaos, and emotional pain, if they encourage, let's continue and unpack what that truly means. In the previous section, we talked about recognizing people by their actions, their fruits, and learning to discern who truly belongs in your life. Now let's go deeper into what it means to guard your heart with wisdom and set godly boundaries. If someone is constantly leading you towards sin rather than righteousness, if they drain your energy instead of uplifting your spirit, it's time to protect your heart. Forgiveness is not optional, it's a command. But trust? That's a choice. Many believers fall into the trap of thinking that because we're called to love and forgive, we must give everyone unrestricted access to our lives. But even Jesus didn't do that. Jesus set boundaries. He didn't chase after those who walked away. He didn't beg Judas not to betray him. He didn't entrust himself to those who were double-minded or driven by impure motives. He forgave, yes, but he did not allow himself to be manipulated. So, if you're constantly surrounded by people who hurt you, who mock or disregard your faith, who consistently pull you away from God's purpose, it's time to pause. It's time to seek discernment in prayer and ask God to reveal who truly belongs in your inner circle. And more than anything, it's time to stop allowing your kindness to be misused. Your heart is precious. Your calling is sacred. True kindness isn't about pleasing everyone. It's not about always saying yes or avoiding conflict. It certainly isn't about letting others trample your dignity in the name of being nice. Real kindness flows from truth and wisdom. The Bible calls us to be kind, but it also calls us to be wise. It teaches us to love, but never at the expense of enabling sin. It teaches us to serve, but not to the point of losing our spiritual health. Jesus embodied this perfectly. He showed love to sinners, but he never compromised truth to make them feel comfortable. He welcomed the broken, the lost, the desperate, but he never allowed them to remain unchanged. And when the rich young ruler came to him seeking eternal life, well, that's where we'll pick up next. Picking up from where we left off, Jesus welcomed the lost, but he never allowed them to remain in their sin. And when the rich young ruler approached him, Jesus didn't just affirm him or tell him what he wanted to hear. He spoke the truth, even when it was difficult to accept. When the Pharisees tried to trap Jesus with their loaded questions, he responded with clarity and wisdom. He never allowed them to twist his words or manipulate the situation. His kindness was inseparable from discernment. That's a powerful example for us, especially in a culture that often confuses kindness with passivity. Many people believe that to be kind is to accept everything, to tolerate every behavior, to avoid all conflict. They assume that love must always be soft, always agreeable, always yielding. But that's not the nature of godly kindness. The kindness that comes from God is never blind. It is not foolish. It does not overlook red flags or excuse wrongdoing. True kindness sees things clearly. It recognizes the reality of situation and responds with wisdom. It doesn't mean giving to those who only seek to exploit your generosity. It doesn't mean repeatedly forgiving someone who refuses to change, while continuing to put yourself in harm's way. And it certainly doesn't mean keeping toxic people in your life just to avoid looking unkind. Proverbs 27 verse 6 says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." In other words, real kindness sometimes shows up in the form of difficult conversations. It means speaking the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Because the person who flatters you while guiding you into destruction isn't showing love. The one who lies just to make you feel better in the moment isn't being kind. But the one who speaks the truth with love, even when it stings, is showing genuine kindness. Jesus modeled this perfectly. He didn't hesitate to rebuke Peter when Peter spoke out of line. He didn't hold back when calling out hypocrisy. He corrected misunderstandings about the nature of God, not to shame, but to enlighten. Every word he spoke, even the hard ones, were filled with divine love and godly wisdom. So how can we learn to walk in that same kind of kindness? Firm yet loving, honest yet compassionate? That's what we'll explore in the next part. Continuing from the last point, Jesus spoke truth with love and never compromised just to make people comfortable. His kindness was always anchored in discernment. That same principle applies to how we live and love today. Jesus never enabled sin. His mercy never became an excuse for wrongdoing. His patience was not a license for people to continue in rebellion. Yet, in today's world, people with kind hearts are often taken advantage of. Some see generosity as an opening for manipulation. Others confuse gentleness with weakness. That's why it's essential that kindness always walks hand in hand with discernment. Proverbs 4 verse 7 reminds us, "Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. And with all thy getting, get understanding." This wisdom isn't optional, it's vital. We need wisdom in how we give, how we serve, how we speak, and how we love. We must consistently seek God's guidance, asking Him for discernment in every relationship, every word we speak, and every decision we make. There's a time to be patient and a time to walk away, a time to extend grace and a time to set boundaries, a time to give freely and a time to hold back in caution. Wisdom helps us discern the difference. The kindness that comes from God is not reckless. It doesn't drain the life out of the giver in the name of selflessness. It doesn't say yes to every request, especially when doing so would pull us away from obedience to God's will. It never allows sin to grow unchecked just to avoid confrontation or maintain surface-level peace. True kindness reflects the heart of God, merciful yet just, loving yet firm, patient yet filled with wisdom. And while it's tempting to judge others or to wish for swift justice when we've been wronged, the Bible is clear: judgment does not belong to us. Romans 12:19 says, "Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." So, how do we release the need for revenge and trust God to bring justice in His time? Let's look closer at that next. As we explored in the previous section, true kindness does not come at the cost of truth, and justice belongs to God, not us. Now, let's look deeper at what it means to truly trust God with the justice we long for. Scripture declares in Romans 12 verse 19, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." That means no matter how deeply we've been hurt, no matter how unfairly we've been treated, and no matter how intensely we may crave justice, we are not the ones meant to take matters into our own hands. God sees everything. He knows every wound, every betrayal, every injustice. He understands the sting of being wronged. And in His perfect timing, not ours, He will bring righteous judgment. The problem with human judgment is that it's limited. We only see what's in front of us, but God sees the heart. We react emotionally, often out of pain or anger, but God acts with complete wisdom. We base our judgments on assumptions, but He sees the hidden motives, the secret sins, and the true intentions behind every action. That's why Jesus gives us a clear warning in Matthew 7 verses 1 to 2. "Judge not, that ye be not judged. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged, and with what measure ye meet, it shall be measured to you again." In other words, the standard we use on others will be applied back to us. It's easy to look at someone's mistakes and quickly write them off. But pause and consider, what if God judged us that way? What if He withheld mercy from us every time we failed? What if He repaid us fully for every sin without grace? The truth is, none of us would stand a chance. Lamentations 3 verse 22 gives us this powerful reminder. "It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because His compassions fail not." We are only here, still breathing, still standing, because of His mercy. So, what does it look like to live in that same mercy toward others while still walking in wisdom and boundaries? Let's turn to that in the next part, building on the last truth, that we are only standing because of God's mercy. It becomes clear that if He has been patient with us, we too are called to extend patience to others. But what does that patience really look like in practice? If God has been slow to anger and rich in compassion toward us, how much more should we reflect that in how we treat others? But let's be clear, patience doesn't mean turning a blind eye to sin. It doesn't mean pretending wrongdoing didn't happen or excusing evil when it rises. It doesn't mean keeping silent in the face of injustice. What it does mean is trusting God with what is beyond our reach, releasing to Him the weight of judgment that only He can carry. When we try to take justice into our own hands, we step outside the boundaries of God's will. We risk becoming bitter, angry, and overwhelmed by the desire for revenge. But when we surrender it to God, when we truly place the situation in His hands, we find something much more powerful: peace. We find freedom from the toxic grip of resentment. We find rest in knowing that the Judge of all the earth will always do what is right. Some of you have been carrying pain for far too long. You've been waiting for justice, hoping for the day when those who hurt you will finally be held accountable. But hear this: God is saying, leave it to me. He saw every moment. He heard every word. He collected every tear. He knows the full extent of your pain. And in His perfect time, not yours, He will bring justice. But it will be His justice, not the kind we might imagine in our wounded hearts. God's judgment is never rushed, never unfair, and never based on incomplete knowledge. He sees the motives, weighs the hearts, and discerns what we never could. His decisions are always righteous, every time. So what is our role? It is not to seek revenge. It's not to pass final judgment. Our role is to trust, to walk in obedience, to let go of the burden of trying to control what only He can make right. You're not called to keep toxic people in your life. Yes, we're commanded to love, to forgive, and to show kindness. But that does not mean staying trapped in relationships that drain your spirit. In fact, sometimes the kindest thing you can do for them and for yourself is to walk away. And that's what we'll look at next. In the previous part, we reflected on the powerful truth that while we are called to forgive, we are not called to remain in toxic relationships. Forgiveness is a gift from God, but so is wisdom. And sometimes wisdom means stepping away. There are people in this world whose presence doesn't bring peace or growth, but instead drains your joy and pulls you away from God's purpose for your life. Yet many believers fall into the trap of thinking that being a Christian means tolerating everything, enduring mistreatment, staying silent, and continuously allowing harmful people to remain in their lives. But that's not what the Bible teaches. God calls us to walk in wisdom. He tells us to guard our hearts and to fully embrace the freedom He's given us. Even Jesus, full of compassion and love, didn't keep everyone close. He ministered to multitudes. He healed the sick, fed the hungry, and taught the crowds. But He chose to walk intimately only with His disciples. And even among the 12, He had a smaller, trusted inner circle: Peter, James, and John. These were the ones He brought closest, the ones He leaned on in His most intimate moments. But Jesus also knew when it was time to separate Himself from those with harmful motives. When the Pharisees came not to learn, but to trap Him with their words, He didn't argue endlessly. He answered with truth, but then moved on. He didn't linger in hostile company. And when the people in His hometown rejected Him, the Bible tells us He did not perform many miracles there because of their unbelief. He respected their choice, and He walked away. Jesus was not emotionally bound to those who refused to receive what He came to offer. Sometimes real love looks like letting go. Forgiveness does not always mean continued access. The Bible gives us clear warnings about remaining close to destructive people. Proverbs 22 verses 24 to 25 says, "Make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man thou shalt not go, lest thou learn his ways and get a snare to thy soul." That means if someone around you is constantly filled with anger, bitterness, or negativity, their spirit can begin to affect yours. Keeping toxic people in your life doesn't make you a more loving or faithful Christian. In fact, it can lead you into spiritual traps that God never intended for you to endure. So what should we do when love, wisdom, and truth call us to draw the line? Let's continue in the next section to find out. Previously, we explored how staying connected to toxic people doesn't make you more faithful. It can actually pull you away from God's purpose. Now, let's take a deeper look at what happens when we keep holding on to what's draining us. When someone consistently drains your energy, disrupts your peace, and distracts you from your calling, it's time to be honest. Something has to change. There are people in your life who, no matter how much love you pour out, no matter how many chances you give, will never change. You've shown grace. You've extended kindness. You've forgiven again and again. But still, they lie, manipulate, and bring chaos into your world. God is not asking you to keep holding on to what's harming you. Some relationships must come to an end so you can step fully into what God has prepared for you. In 2 Corinthians 6:14, Scripture says, "Be not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness?" This verse isn't only about marriage. It applies to any close relationship. If someone constantly pulls you away from God, encourages compromise, or consistently brings more harm than good, it is not unkind to let them go. Forgiveness is required, but reconciliation is not. You can forgive without reopening the door. You can love from a distance. You can pray for someone without staying connected to them. Some of you have been wrestling with guilt, feeling like you're obligated to maintain relationships that God has clearly been calling you to release. But God isn't asking you to stay in a situation that is slowly breaking you. He's asking you to trust Him, to walk in wisdom, and to surround yourself with people who lift you up, not tear you down. Your time, your energy, your peace, they are sacred. Don't waste them on those who constantly bring damage instead of growth, confusion instead of clarity, and pain instead of purpose. So what does it really look like to live with that kind of wisdom and spiritual clarity? Let's explore that in the next part. In the last section, we reflected on the importance of letting go of what drains you so you can fully embrace the life God intends. Now, let's explore what Jesus Himself taught about setting boundaries and guarding what is sacred. In Matthew 7 verse 6, Jesus said, "Give not that which is holy unto the dogs, neither cast ye your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet, and turn again and rend you." This powerful statement reveals a deep truth. Not everyone deserves access to the most sacred parts of your life. Not everyone will value what God has placed within you. And it's not your responsibility to keep pouring out to those who only seek to take. There are times when the most faithful thing you can do is release what's holding you back, so your hands are free to receive what God has prepared ahead. Don't let fear keep you tethered to toxic relationships. Don't carry the weight of guilt for choosing to protect your peace. You were never created to bear the burden of keeping people in your life who refuse to grow, who refuse to change. Let go, trust God, and move forward into the freedom He's calling you into. Yes, we are called to extend grace, but we're not called to be doormats. God calls us to kindness, to love, and to mercy. But nowhere does He ask us to be used, manipulated, or constantly disrespected. There's a clear and holy difference between grace and enabling, between forgiveness and ongoing mistreatment. Grace does not mean letting someone continually wound you. It means showing the love of Christ while also walking in wisdom and strength. And Jesus modeled this perfectly. He was full of grace. He healed the sick, welcomed the outcast, and forgave the repentant. But He was never passive. He did not allow Himself to be controlled. He didn't let others take advantage of His compassion. When the Pharisees tried to trap Him with clever words, He didn't stay silent. He responded with truth and wisdom. And when He walked into the temple and saw corruption, Let's revisit that powerful moment in the next part. In the last scene we revisited, Jesus entered the temple, saw corruption, and took bold, decisive action. This moment reveals something essential. Kindness is not weakness, and grace is not the absence of boundaries. Jesus overturned the tables of the money changers and drove them out, declaring, "My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." His words were strong, his actions deliberate. He was kind, but never weak. He was endlessly patient, but never passive. He was full of forgiveness, but he was not a doormat. There's a common misconception that being a Christian means always saying yes, always yielding, always enduring mistreatment with a smile. But that is not what God expects from us. In Matthew 10, verse 16, Jesus said, "Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves." That verse holds a powerful tension. We are called to walk in love, yes, but we are also called to walk in wisdom. Kindness must be accompanied by discernment. Forgiveness must be rooted in truth. And grace must never come at the cost of your well-being. To extend grace does not mean to keep toxic people close. To forgive someone doesn't require you to allow repeated mistreatment. There are times when grace means stepping back. There are moments when love must draw a boundary. Jesus forgave Peter after his denial, but he didn't run after Judas when Judas betrayed him. He spoke truth to the Pharisees, but when they rejected him, he didn't linger. He loved all people, but he didn't give everyone equal access to his heart or his time. Some of you have been battling with this very issue. You've been trying your best to be kind, to be patient, to extend grace. And yet, people around you keep taking advantage of your goodness. They misinterpret your kindness as weakness. They expect you to keep giving while they only take, offering nothing in return but more hurt. So what do you do when your heart wants to love, but your spirit feels depleted? Let's talk about that in the next part. In the last section, we acknowledged a tough but vital truth. Your kindness should never be an open door for constant pain. Now let's address the question many believers quietly ask themselves. Does being a Christian mean I have to put up with this? The answer is no, it doesn't. You can be kind and still set boundaries. You can love people deeply and still say no when necessary. You can forgive someone fully and still choose to walk away. Proverbs 4 verse 23 reminds us, "Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life." Guarding your heart is not selfish, it's scriptural. Protecting your peace isn't unkind, it's essential. God never intended for you to live under constant pressure, manipulation, or emotional abuse. His desire is for you to walk in freedom, to experience joy, and to live in the peace that comes from truly following Him. That doesn't mean we become closed off, bitter, or hardened. It doesn't mean we stop being kind or compassionate. What it means is that we walk in wisdom. We show grace, yes, but not at the expense of our peace. We extend mercy, but not to the point of allowing ourselves to be mistreated again and again. We forgive as Christ commands, but we do not remain in environments that continually damage our hearts. God has called us to be light in this world, but that doesn't mean we have to let others dim our light. He has called us to love, but that love should never become an excuse for others to take advantage of us. There is great strength in grace, and there is real power in wisdom. The key is learning how to walk in both. We are called to love like Jesus, to forgive as we have been forgiven, and to show mercy as He has shown mercy to us. But we are also called to walk with discernment, to guard our hearts, and to set healthy boundaries. And Jesus? He showed us exactly how that balance looks in action. Let's continue with His example in the next part. In the last part, we were reminded that Jesus was full of grace, but He never allowed Himself to be used or manipulated. That same balance of compassion and discernment is what we're called to walk in as His followers. Jesus extended mercy, yes, but he never allowed others to control him. He forgave, but he also established clear boundaries. He loved fully, but he never tolerated sin. And in the same way, we are not called to carry the burden of toxic relationships, nor are we expected to remain in situations that constantly drain our spirit or distract us from God's purpose for our lives. Grace does not mean accepting endless mistreatment. Forgiveness does not mean allowing harm to continue unchecked. There is a time to be patient, and there's a time to walk away. There's a time to give freely, and there's also a time to be cautious. Wisdom, given by God, helps us know the difference. Judgment is not ours to carry. It belongs to God alone. We are not responsible for fixing or changing those who are unwilling to grow or transform. Our role is to trust Him completely, to extend grace without sacrificing our emotional and spiritual health, and to intentionally surround ourselves with people who strengthen our faith instead of weakening it. When we walk in both grace and wisdom, we reflect God's heart, merciful yet just, loving yet firm, patient yet discerning. And as we follow Christ's example, we begin to step into the fullness of the peace, freedom, and purpose He desires for us. Thank you so much for watching. I pray that you walk boldly in grace, in wisdom, and in God's truth. Stay blessed, stay strong, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more uplifting messages. Wishing you health, happiness, and the deep peace that only God can give.